Hello everyone, my name is Peter Chai. I'm really glad and happy to be here today to share about my own experience in survey design and implementation. The TA session for today is titled Survey Design and Implementation Framework, Some General Considerations for Survey Planners. In today's session, I will basically be going through three important aspects of survey design that we have to think about when we actually start planning to do a questionnaire. The concepts that I will be elaborating on today will be pretty general, but if you are really interested in real-world cases or examples, you can go to the online resources, and there are a lot of election studies or public opinion studies. Then you can have a good understanding of what these real studies are. In my own opinion, I believe that in order to improve ourselves, we have to practice. We need to participate in survey design, implementation, and data collection processes. And compared to the past, it's increasingly easy for us as students to design and implement surveys with the help of the internet and some online software. Therefore, I believe for social science students, when we are really interested in some social issues, we might be thinking about whether we can tackle this issue by implementing a small-scale survey around our friends and families. But one thing to keep in mind is that for different universities, we have different academic ethics committees. So maybe you have to go through an application process if your surveys are actually targeting at university-wide students. And the committee members will be the ones who will approve or disapprove your survey questions. As a student, when you are doing a survey project, you might be thinking about how you would make your survey really representative. But your goal is not to make everything perfect. Your goal should be understanding what kind of biases or errors are actually embedded in your survey, so that you know what kind of direction you will be improving your surveys in the future. Although many surveys look really easy to design, they actually involve a lot of thinking behind. So I will start by talking about the conceptualization and operationalization for survey questions. Before we start designing surveys, we have to keep in mind that it is important for us to come up and develop a non-normative and testable research question or hypothesis. And we have to identify what kind of variables are there in our hypothesis. After that, we have to think about what types of questions and phrases we can use in order to reflect our variables and hypothesis, and whether this translation between the variables and your questions can be reliable and accurate. The general idea is that your questions should reflect accurately your hypothesis. Some example questions that you might ask yourself is that whether your wording is too complicated, whether your respondents can understand your questions, and whether your questions are too general, which is really hard for the respondents to answer. One easy assumption is that when you target a general population, you assume that they are really busy and they are not super smart. They don't have enough brain capacity or time to look at every single word and every single element of your questions. So we have to design a question that is easily understandable to them in a limited time frame. And we help them not to make mistakes easily. Another issue to think about is whether you include too many questions inside one questionnaire, so that the readers might feel exhausted and get lost in the middle of it. Again, these considerations are related to your target population and your target respondents. Therefore, you have to closely link the way you structure your questions to who are you targeting at. There are several different kind of well-known skills or response categories you can use in your question. For example, you can use the Likert scale: strongly agree, agree, neither agree, or disagree, strongly disagree. So the readers could choose one of them. And another way of putting it is the numerical scale. For example, if you strongly agree, you can put 10. If you strongly disagree, you can put 1. Then these are different ways you can structure your response categories. And also, you might think whether you allow the respondents to freely text some answers into your questions, like an open-ended question. But that might bring some degree of complexities in your data collection and data analysis in the future. And you might want to include some demographic questions, for example, gender, age, income, region, those kind of indicators according to your research design. And you might also want to think about whether your questionnaire should be designed as an anonymous questionnaire or you want it to be real name questionnaire. And lastly, you might think about whether you allow the respondents to answer something like, I don't know. So in the second part, I will be talking about target population and expected sample size and some representation errors, which are as important as the measurement errors. The first general question that you might want to ask is which sampling method you want to use. Recently, the online questionnaire is really popular, but there are still some other traditional ways of questionnaires, such as mail-in questionnaire by post or telephone and face-to-face interviews. But keep in mind that when you choose sampling methods, it might bring some degree of representation errors into your studies because different types of people or social segments, they might have different preferences or access to different sampling methods you are using. Just give you a really easy example. The elderly probably would have more access to mail-in questionnaire, telephone and face-to-face interviews. And younger generations, they prefer and they have more access to the internet and the internet-based questionnaires. But if your questionnaire project is only targeting at university students, online questionnaire might be a really cost-effective and less time-consuming way of implementation. There are different types of websites, platforms, or software for us to conduct our questionnaire online, and one of them is the Google Form. Google Form actually has a lot of different functions and options to choose. You can make it anonymous, or you can make it mandatory for the respondent to register with their email addresses. As students, you might not have access to any research funding, so probably the best way to advertise your questionnaire to more population is to use your social media platform and ask your friends to help you. And if you're doing a comparative study across different countries or regions, you might need different versions of translations of your same questionnaire. But again, it requires a lot of effort and money. And you might need to think about whether the same question makes sense in a different cultural setting or whether the wording is appropriate in a different cultural setting. And there are a range of different technical issues you might want to think about. So basically, on the cover page of your questionnaire, you might want to indicate that this is a non-commercial questionnaire, only for research and academic purposes. And whether you want to make every single question mandatory, or you allow the respondents to skip certain questions. And very importantly, you might be thinking about how long your collection period should be. If you are analyzing a specific reaction toward a social issue among a certain population, you might not want your collection period to be so long, so that you know exactly the responses are within a certain period. But I guess you should have an expected number of respondents you are targeting at when you advertise your questionnaire, whether it's online or offline. It's not necessarily the more the better, but you have to make sure that whether you are using a random sampling or you are using a specific way of sampling so that it makes the demographics matching the population that you want to investigate. Similar to measurement errors, there will always be representation errors. You can't avoid everything, but when you realize there is a certain type of error in your measurement or in your distribution of questionnaire, then you should indicate clearly on your paper. I believe self-evaluation and self-reflection are really important traits for researchers. One tip I can probably give you is that if you don't have enough research funding, time, or research experience, you should try to narrow down your research question to a smaller target population so that you can be more representative when you distribute your questionnaire. Well, I'm making really general conclusions here, but for specific types of sampling methods, for example, interview, there will be a lot of resources online that teach people how to do interviews, and the different ways to solicit answers from others, and whether there are some improvisation when you make questions. Therefore, I guess compared to online or mail-in questionnaires, telephone and face-to-face interviews are more demanding in terms of research experience, as they are actually interacting with the respondents in person. Lastly, I will be moving on to talk about data collection and statistical outputs, and I will be specifically addressing the problem of processing errors. So after you have designed your survey, implemented your survey, you come to the stage of data collection and data analysis. Well, if you involve some qualitative options in your survey design, how would you codify it is the problem. For example, Google Form has a backend function, which you can transfer all the data stored there to an Excel sheet or later to RStudio for further treatment of data. There are a range of different softwares or applications where you can analyze data or run regressions or do summary statistics. For example, Excel, RStudio, Stata, or SPSS. But all the different softwares, they will come up with more or less similar results if the way you treat your data is similar. But one problem with survey results is that if you realize that there are some types of representation errors in your sampling method, you might want to incorporate this method called weighting to your responses. So in that case, you need some sort of expertise in how to do it, and you might want to consult your professors or your TAs for help. Similar to the questions design, there is a degree of subjectivity into the way you weight your data. So please consult those with expertise. If you allow some kind of open-ended questions in your questionnaire design, you might need some techniques from the quantitative text analysis. And again, it's a really advanced skill. The general idea is that you have to formalize everything and present everything in a neat way in your paper. And you have to export the regression tables or the summary statistics tables from the software that you use for data analysis. And some statistics might include correlation coefficients, statistical significance levels, R-squares, or test statistics such as t-test or f-test. Again, it depends on the type of regression model you are using. But the specification of a regression formula and the ways to regress your different indicators and how you treat your control variables are some questions that you need to discuss with your colleagues or other classmates in the same research project. In this short tutorial, I don't intend to give a really comprehensive overview of how data analytics or empirical testings are run for survey data. Instead, I only want to bring up some possible considerations for you to think about when you design your own survey and you analyze your survey results.